Okay, Chat and Train Volume 2. I'm going to take you through an upper body workout starting from the warm-up, which counts as my mobility work, into the hand balance and strength work. So typically this session takes me around 2 hours if I'm very diligent, sometimes 2 hours 15, 2 hours 30 if I'm messing around, sending some messages on my phone, talking to people in the gym. So let's get into it. We're going to train, and I'm going to answer a few questions that I received through Instagram DMs and email during my rest periods. Okay, so one of the first questions I received was actually, walk us through a full bridge or back bend session. So I like to do my back bending work in my upper body sessions. I primarily focus on my shoulders and thoracic spine, because I'm training a lot of hip extension on my lower body flexibility focused days when I'm training for my front splits and middle splits, for example. So if I was to just take somebody through a full back bending session, typically it would look like warm up the wrists, do something for shoulder flexion, do something for global spine extension, and then do something for hip extension. So I tend to leave out the hip extension work in this day and just focus a lot on the shoulders. So you can get a glimpse of what my warm-up looks like. So I do about 3 to 5 rounds of this, depending on how the body's feeling. Typically, if I'm about to deload, I'll do 5 rounds, and then the week after that, I'll do about 2 to 3 rounds. But a good structure is start with 3 rounds, add a set each week till you get to 5, and then deload back to 3. So I actually like to start with the bridge as my very first exercise in my warm-up. This is a bit more advanced, but I like to see where I'm at cold. So let's take a look, and then we'll compare it to my last set. I'm going to do 3 sets today. Wedge yourself in. Okay. Ooh. Spine's feeling a little bit stiff today, but overall, not bad. So we're going to go through about 4 or 5 exercises before we come back to this bridge. I'm just going to show you one set of those, and then we'll come back to the bridge for my last set. One of my favorite exercises to warm up the wrist, the finger extension plank, I call it. So basically, I just wedge my fingers against this foam roller, try to drive my knuckles down toward the ground, or in this case, toward the foam roller. Externally rotate at the shoulder, turn the elbow pits forward, and then just lean into it. Get a really deep stretch through the wrist flexor area, the finger flexors, the palm. And honestly, this really helps take away any blockage I feel in the front of my wrist when I perform wrist extension. So I just hold here, light isometrics through the fingers into the roller, about 30 seconds. I'll turn my fingers in, so a little bit of internal rotation. Stretch the ulnar side of the hand, or the outside, kind of the outside of the wrist as well. And then thumb extension. Put the thumbs on the outsides of the roller and just kind of shimmy around, because if I just lean forward, my head hits the wall. So I'll kind of lean away, stretch the right side of my thumb, lean to the right, stretch the left side of the thumb. Anywhere 15 to 20 seconds each side. Hanging in locates, one of my favorite exercises for pec flexibility. So the pecs as a whole, pec minor, pec major, can significantly restrict that end range of shoulder flexion, because if they're tight, they restrict the ability for the scapula to posteriorly tip at the top. You can run into impingement and whatnot. So these really have good carryover into my bridge. So we're going to start in an eagle hang, internally rotated hand position, knuckles facing forward. Start wider than you think here, because it can get very jammy in the shoulder. And then fully traction. So I'm fully shrugging to create space for my humerus to flex and rotate. I made a separate Instagram video about why scapular elevation is so important, so check that out if you haven't already. Okay, so fully shrug, and then I'm gonna drive my chest down toward the ground, foot supported here, making sure to keep that shrug the entire time and fully retract the scapula. I'm not just going upward because that causes me to jam up a bit. My hips are scooping backward and up, kind of like a C shape. Every few reps or so, I'll go a bit more narrow. More narrow. So I'll stay around this range. Any more narrow, it gets a bit clunky. You're going for smooth reps here. Okay, next we'll reinforce some of that scapular elevation and active shoulder flexion with these prone stick lifts. I'm gonna do high reps here to get a nice pump through my upper back and prep the shoulders for some handstands. Okay, so I get a nice narrow grip here, a little bit inside shoulder width. I'm gonna externally rotate, so I'm pushing the outsides of my pinky into the bar as if I'm trying to break the bar in half. Posteriorly tilt, shrug, and then lift. People butcher these a lot. You'll see the whole lumbar spine arch. They're lifting super high, using a lot of momentum at the spine, deviating into internal rotation too early. So be very strict with this. If your liftoffs look like this, you're barely getting off the ground, that's how you know you're doing them right. If you'll notice, I kind of reset each rep. Actively shrug, then initiate the lift. Shrug, then lift. Okay, next, weighted trilat insertion stretch or butcher's block stretch, whatever you want to call it. Great stretch for the long head of the tricep, which is a shoulder extensor. And you're also stretching the lat too. With this one, you want to stay rounded in the spine, tucked at the pelvis. I like to use this easy bar because it's really comfortable on the wrist and it doesn't restrict your range of motion through elbow flexion. You can also use a dumbbell or a dowel with a weight through it, but not as comfortable on the wrist and the elbows. So I'm going to take the narrow grip, elbows at the edge of the bench, fully flex the elbow, tuck under rib cage back. This is a rib cage retraction, scapular protraction, and then just sink the head through, elevate at the scap, and then we're just going to lightly isometrically hold here, driving the elbows into the bench. Deep breaths. Okay, this is just a warm-up. Remember, we're doing upwards of 5 rounds here, so you don't have to go to like failure here. A lot of people do this in a full plank, and they're shaking. Not needed. I'll prescribe it sometimes to, treat it as like a core or strength exercise, but for the purpose of this, just warming up shoulder flexion because the bridge is the main event. This baseball team, bunch of kids, they rent space out of this gym, put their shit everywhere. Get this out of here. This is my dojo, don't mess with it. Okay, last exercise in the sequence is for external rotation at the shoulder. I tend to be more limited in this plane of motion, this kind of neutral plane I call it, where the elbow is by the sides, less compared to here, where it seems like I have full range of motion. So a really nice exercise, very accessible exercise, is the wall external rotation push-up, I call it. So you're gonna have your hand about hip height, fingers facing backwards. Then I'm gonna lean away a bit, rotate my torso away, and try to maintain this torso rotation as I press my body toward the wall. Now you would think this portion is the press. I try to envision this eccentric as the press. It's like I'm actively trying to pull into external rotation, actively trying to keep the torso facing away, and you're gonna get a nice cramp through the external rotators at the shoulder. Trying to get the elbow as close to the ribs as you can, anywhere from 8 to 12 repetitions. This is my more limited side, so I'll mostly just do this side, but of course you could do both sides. So I struggle on this side to get my elbow toward the ribs without a lot of compensation at the spine. I'm not worrying so much about compensation though. I just want to find that nice contraction and that nice stretch under the armpit, stretch of that subscapularis muscle. All right, that's one round through of everything. Typically this takes me anywhere from like 8 to 10 minutes. So when I'm doing 5 rounds of this, could be around 40-45 minutes. So it's an extensive session for the shoulders. Okay, checking back in for last set of bridge. Let's see where we're at. What do we think? A little bit deeper or what? One of the biggest mistakes people make when they try to get flexible is they don't do multiple sets of a stretch. And that is probably 80% of the battle there, is just doing more volume, because your nervous system recalibrates the stretch reflex set to set. You do the first set of stretching, I basically call that the throwaway set. It doesn't count. You're basically just shaking off the rust, getting back into your kind of operating range. And then the next subsequent sets, those are the ones where you're working on actually building new range of motion. So anywhere from 3 to 5 sets is the sweet spot. I tend to get the deepest in my bridge with 5 sets. But that one actually felt pretty good on the 3rd set. Okay, so there you go. That's how I structure my backbending and bridge sessions for myself, with more of a focus on the shoulders. Sometimes I'll do foot elevated bridges. Sometimes I'll add a little bit more thoracic spine extension work, which I didn't do so much here. More of a focus of improving that shoulder flexion with a closed rib cage position, because that's a bit more of a limitation for me when it comes to hand balance, which I'm about to get into. Guys, if you're watching this and you have any questions, write them in the comments section on this video. I'll be checking them, and I'll make another video like this and answer any more questions you have. That being said, let's get into some handstands. We're not going to spend too much time here because the one-arm handstand probably isn't relevant to most of you guys watching this, but I'll just share a few insights and where I'm at with my own practice. Oh my God, that's so heavy. Tuck handstand is such a weakness for me. So I basically warm up with 3 sets of 15 to 20 seconds, tuck, 5-finger weight shifts, trying to use some of that back bending flexibility too to kind of open up my ribs, open up my shoulders, because that's a big problem of mine with the one-arm handstand is keeping the shoulder open. One of my other questions was about goal setting. How do we set long-term goals to give us the best fighting chance in improving our range of motion long term? I'm kind of summarizing this based on my memory. And to answer this, I'm actually going to share with you a conversation I had with a new client of mine. We had a coaching call, and I was asking his goals and what he wants to achieve through working with me. And he gave me one specific goal, which was to improve his back bend and actually get into a back bridge position. And he was coming to me for low back pain primarily. And I really like this goal because it's not even about the back bridge. One of his biggest aggravating factors is spinal extension. So he described it as getting his spine past neutral. So anything like past here was painful, a lot of compressive pain in the low back. So he looked at the back bridge as simply an expression of loaded back extension, a very compressed position for the lumbar spine. Pelvis is an anterior tilt, hips an extension, abs are on full stretch. If you have low back pain, back bridge is not going to be comfortable. So basically, if you can do a back bridge, then this means you have some tolerance to spinal extension. Now, this doesn't mean that being able to do a back bridge means you don't have low back pain. Look at the population of yogis that have low back pain. They're super flexible spines. Gymnasts, contortionists, they can bend themselves in half backwards, but they still have compression-based low back pain. So, for a very stiff population, maybe working towards more deeper ranges of motion can help build tolerance to that spinal extension. But for a more flexible, hypermobile population, maybe they need to build a bit more stability, a bit more strength, a bit more force production in some of those spinal extensors. What I want you to get out of this is set yourself a functional goal of something you want to achieve. Don't just chase pain relief and say, I want to get out of back pain, I want to get out of hip pain, because then you're always going to be chasing sensation, and sometimes your body lies to you. The exercises, the interventions that you're doing lie to you. You do an exercise and you're like, oh, this one feels good immediately after. Or you do an exercise, ooh, this one was bothersome immediately after. As long as that exercise is progressive and working towards a goal of yours based on your individual limitations, then it's probably a good exercise. It doesn't have to feel good in the moment. You could be a little bit more sore after that. That's okay, as long as your body is accepting more range of motion and then that soreness isn't taking away from the intensity that you can apply into that stretch or that strengthening exercise. So don't chase sensation, chase long-term progress objectively throughout the exercises that you're doing and towards a more broad general goal. That would be my advice. Okay, a lot of talking, back into another set. Okay, next question I got asked. As a desk worker, how can I prevent my job from reducing my flexibility? Do I have to do exercises throughout the day? Honestly, I hate that this is still a myth out there, that sitting decreases your flexibility. I know people who sit more than I do for their job, and they have better flexibility than I do, especially through their hip flexors, which are mostly demonized for getting super stiff when you sit for prolonged periods of time. Think about this, when you sleep for 8 hours a night and your hips are flexed, like you don't wake up and you're in this fetal position and you can't get out of that position. Your nervous system doesn't mold your muscles and your joints to the positions that you spend a ton of passive time in. they mold yourself around where you spend more loaded time in, we should say. So basically, any exercise I would give to somebody who sits at a desk, I would give to somebody who is active but has still limited range of motion. I do online coaching. I sit on a computer as part of my occupation, and then I go to the gym, I train like normal. I don't try to offset the stiffness from sitting by doing a bunch of extra stretches throughout the day. Now, it's good to have movement snacks throughout the day, but that's just for general health. You know, get some low impact steady state cardio, or LISS as they call it in the bodybuilding community. That's just good for overall metabolic health. But when it comes to flexibility, stimulate, don't annihilate. So as long as you're training the positions that you want to improve, whether it's once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever the frequency is, do those in the gym, focus on getting better at those. When you train them, you're doing 3-5 sets like we spoke about, and then recover. Don't just hammer these positions again because you sat too much one day, or maybe you go on a flight and you think right when you get off the flight you have to do a big stretching session. When you stiffen up, that's your body telling you that it's overly stressed. So when you think you need more stretching, you probably need more rest. Circling back to the question, what would I do different from somebody who has a desk job? Take more movement breaks, but again, that's just for general health. Get assessed, see what your stiffest areas are, work on those 1 or 2 times a week, train them with intensity, carve out time in your pre-existing workouts to get them done, and over time, over months, weeks, you're going to see progress there, and you're going to be feeling less stiff at rest. And you can tolerate prolonged periods of sitting without needing to fidget around and stretch. I could go on flights to Bali and Thailand and only get up once or twice. These are 17-hour flights to Singapore, then a layover, and then another flight to Indonesia. That was just my last trip. And my back doesn't bother me anymore. My hips don't radiate with pain anymore because I've built up tolerance to these different short ranges and ranges. And just sitting in a mid-range doesn't feel uncomfortable for me anymore. And I don't have this need to constantly scratch the itch. Yes, when I get off that plane, I feel super stiff. My legs are swollen. But I actually don't train when I get off that plane. I rest that day, take some walks. I don't try to get in a flexibility session. I wait a few days till my nervous system is recovered. Okay, more handstands. I'm gonna be doing some one-arm handstand in baby straddle, which is basically just a smaller straddle. Let's see where I'm at for the first set. Ooh, not bad for righty on the first set too. Lefty time. Ugh. No good. My left side is the better side, straighter elbow, better shoulder range of motion, better shoulder strength, but it's the less coordinated side. So my right side, it's a bit more stable, but I don't last as long on that side. The elbow bends a bit. My hips rotate a bit more, but I have more success on that side, surprisingly. But any longer holds come on my left side. All right, got asked about elbow tendon pain, specifically more golfer's elbow, so medial epicondylgia. Now, when it comes to tendon pain, the number one fix is going to be reducing stress for this region that's overloaded. It's starting to become degenerative. You need to reduce the stress from these wrist flexors, finger flexor muscles. Now, that comes with program modification, switching up the grip that you're using with pulling, decreasing the overall amount of pulling, the overall amount of gripping that you're doing. But that being said, it's a boring answer. So how do we actually get some relief in these tissues so we can actually train our upper body with exercises that involve gripping? So realize that this whole medial compartment of the elbow couples with elbow flexion, forearm pronation, and wrist flexion. So if these tissues are very compressed and bunched up, I like to start loading these tendons through longer muscle lengths. So making sure we have elbow extension and wrist extension available to us. And a lot of times I'll check the rotation of the forearm, forearm pronation, forearm supination. If we don't have at least 70 degrees of pronation and 90 degrees of supination, then we know we need to load some of these forearm muscles at length in the rotational plane. So one really nice exercise I like to do is a dumbbell elbow extension with an isometric into pronation to improve some of that supination and load this medial side at length. So let me show it to you. Okay, so I'll grab the dumbbell on the inner side between the thumb and index finger. Set the elbow flat, extend the arm fully supinate. Okay, so we're getting a bit of a distal bicep stretch here, but then also loading these forearm pronators at length. Now the isometric is just going to be trying to drive the dumbbell upward into pronation. Okay, so it's if I'm trying to do this. Okay, so this is a heavy enough, hopefully you could see, this is a heavy enough dumbbell that I can't move. Okay, so it's more of an overcoming isometric here. So I'm pushing into pronation. Pronators should be rock hard. If it's kind of stressing the elbow too much, you can bend it. You're going to have a bit more strength here. Typically, I would start here with the bent elbow, and once that's a bit more tolerable, you can move into elbow extension. Okay, do 3 sets of around 45 to 60 seconds, and you should notice a bit of relief in that inner part of the elbow. Now, as frustrating as handstands are, the best part about them, at least in the context of my goals, is they're a low enough intensity practice that I can do them frequently. I train them about 5 days a week, and they allow me to express the flexibility that I'm building in the background. So I'm working into max shoulder flexion range of motion. It gives me a reason to train my shoulder mobility. Whereas my hips, I got into training those to increase their flexibility because originally I couldn't squat full depth and I wanted to do Olympic weightlifting, plus they were painful. And you know, some of the hip opening drills I was doing helped relieve some of the symptoms. So again, I took that mindset of, you know, what if I was able to work towards a deep squat, a dragon squat, pistol squats, Cossack squats. Maybe I'll have more accessibility and tolerance to deep flexion and internal rotation. So that's why handstands are really nice, because it allows me to express that shoulder range of motion that I'm working on, and it gives me kind of a reason to keep going with it and never skip it week by week. And that's where the gains come, the long-term, consistent exposure to those end ranges of motion under load over the course of months and years. And handstands, it's not something you get good at within weeks and months, it takes years. So it keeps you training that flexibility. And of course, there's some incentive for the lower body too, to get a deeper split for a wider straddle. Ooh, that was a good one. I'll have to look back at the film there, but this is the importance of that shoulder flexion range of motion. If I could get my hips stacked over my shoulders, then everything just feels lighter and more balanced. Like I said, the more I close my shoulders, the more I'm looking forward, the more wobbly my balance is, the more I banana at the spine. It's just a disaster. Doing a bit more work in full straddle. Thumb is starting to bother me here randomly, so I'm going to take it easy, probably just do maybe around 3 or 4 sets of this and then move on, live to fight another day. Quite a bit more work on the hands, got some 90-degree push-up stuff after this, so we'll get into the strength stuff. I'm not going to be filming during rest periods too much just because there's a lot of running clock work, so every minute on the minute type of thing, every 90 seconds. So the workout's going to be, I'm going to build up to a heavy 3-rep max weighted ring chin up, and then do some back off work, building up some volume. So every 90 seconds for 10 rounds, 2 reps at about 90% or so of what I worked up in my 3-rep max. And then I'm doing straddle 90-degree push-ups every 45 seconds for 16 total singles. So a lot of density there, a lot of low rest, back to back. So we'll see how I go. And then after that, we got just some general strength work, some weighted bar pull-ups, and some seated barbell military press, about 6 to 8 reps of each. Okay, another question about the lower body. So, why do stiff adductors reduce internal rotation range of motion when they are in fact internal rotators? Great question, but come on. We're in the middle of an upper body workout. Let's talk biceps. Let's talk getting swole, huh? Isn't that more fun to talk about? Look, who am I kidding? The adductors are the biceps of the lower body for me. They are the most stubborn muscles in my body, and they are the most researched muscle that I look into. Now, it's a great question because, yes, the adductors are internal rotators, but some of the posterior adductors, like the adductor magnus and the gracilis, they are hip extensors. So when we lengthen them, they can help improve hip flexion. Now, if we think about this from a biomechanics standpoint, if I have reduced internal rotation, probably means I have reduced flexion as well. So what's the main compensation for reduced hip flexion? Once I get to about 90 degrees, if I don't have that internal rotation and flexion, I'm going to abduct and externally rotate early to afford that space. I'm coming out of the sagittal plane. So in order to improve some of this sagittal plane range of motion, if I reduce tension, improve the length of these posterior adductor fibers, then that's going to delay that frontal plane motion early, so I'll be able to express more internal rotation because I'm not abducting earlier, if that makes sense. And a lot of times, people can't move where they're already stuck. So if they have really stiff adductors, muscles that are pulling their pelvis in an anterior tilt, you know, some of the front adductors that actually act as hip flexors, when those muscles get tight, they'll pull you into an anterior tilt. They'll increase the coverage over the acetabulum, over the femur, so it makes it harder to internally rotate. So when we increase that space, we increase abduction, this now gives us more space to internally rotate into and actually get length into some of the glutes, some of the hip rotators, because we're not restricted from the front of the hip. So this is why people with really stiff front of the hip musculature, hip flexors and adductors, if we loosen those up, we actually give the pelvis a bit more variability to move into more rotation, specifically internal rotation. So yes, these are internal rotators functionally, but if we improve our range of motion into abduction and hip extension, this could potentially give us more space to flex and internally rotate the hip. So it's kind of like counterintuitive. We're not actually working into flexion and internal rotation. We're just going the opposite way, so we have more space to go into flexion and IR. Hopefully that makes sense. It's confusing. Took me a long time to figure it out. So I don't expect you to get it right away, but that's my thought process. Okay, building up to a heavy triple here, weighted ring chin up. I'm trying to get used to pulling higher. I tend to cut it a bit short. So I'm gonna do about 40 kilograms, it's about 88 pounds. Not a fully maximal 3RM here. I want it to be a clean pull each time. So let's see how I go. I'm gonna go to 36 kilograms, which was my 5RM from last week. And I'm gonna perform 2 reps every 90 seconds, 10 rounds. Right now I'm in kind of a volume phase, so I'm doing a lot of sub-maximal intensity work and just building up a lot of rounds of doubles, triples, even sets of 5, 6, but lots of rounds, 5 to 10 rounds. So just building a lot of work capacity. My previous phases have been really intense, a lot of heavy singles with skills, 90-degree push-ups, one-arm chin-up work. So now it feels good to get some volume work in, scale down the intensity a bit, and just get some nice pumps going. I actually enjoy keeping some of the reps a bit lower, but then just doing much higher sets because it keeps the quality of the work high. So I'm not just grinding out a bunch of 3 sets of 10 where those last reps start to look ugly. When it comes to volume work and calisthenics strength skills, it's not all about just getting a pump. We still want to keep some movement quality so it transfers to skill development, and we don't just want to grind out a bunch of reps for the sake of it. Okay, I'm just going to leave these clips rolling while I answer some more questions. You can watch my pull-ups get slower and weaker as the sets go on. Okay, next question. How to improve shoulder internal rotation and why is it important? So lots of talk on internal rotation today. Now, humeral internal rotation is important in achieving end range shoulder flexion and extension. So biomechanically, the scapulohumeral complex behaves very similarly in these two ranges. Also think like the scratching your back type of position requires a lot of internal rotation and extension coupled together, whereas end range shoulder flexion requires flexion and internal rotation coupled together. So how do we improve it? We have 2 ways, direct and indirect methods. I always try to improve it directly first through posterior shoulder stretching. So think sleeper stretch variations, getting length into the rotator cuff muscles like the infraspinatus and teres minor. So maybe you need direct subscapularis strengthening in the shortened ranges. My Supple Shoulders program has it all laid out for you and some of my go-to options for increasing internal rotation. So if you haven't checked that out already, the link is in the bio. And then we have the indirect methods. So this would fall under the category of somebody who's been doing direct work for a while and maybe they're just not having good results with sleeper type stretching. And these people tend to have more superficial stiffness in some of their bigger internal rotator muscles like the lats and the pecs. So just like the hip, you can't move where you're already stuck. If these muscles have this constant concentric orientation and they're pulling the humerus into internal rotation and the scapula into an anterior tilt, then you may not have much more space to move into genuine internal rotation, with the scapula moving the opposing direction, which is a scapular external rotation. So this is why making sure you have a decent amount of shoulder flexion first by getting some of those superficial muscles to lengthen and then not even worrying about the direct internal rotation work for a while would be the best fix. So in fact, this is what worked for me. And until I got my pecs and my lats to release, which were really stiff, like I couldn't really get a full 180 degrees of shoulder flexion, this afforded my joint capsule a bit more slack to move into rotation once the brakes were released, so to speak. Now with a bit of a warm-up, I'm able to get my palm to the ground in a sleeper stretch with minimal work. But also you have to realize that people just give up way too early, and rotational mobility work takes time to improve, and potentially an even longer time if you're layering on a bunch of bodybuilding work in conjunction with your mobility work. Okay, last question just says, ankle dorsiflexion, help. So in my experience, if you have issues with ankle dorsiflexion, then first is to look at the feet. Are they naturally high arched? Are they naturally flat? Both of these different presentations need different interventions. People struggle with like a mechanical block in the front of the ankle joint, not too much stretching in the back. So they just think, you know, the more they chuck a band on the talus and just jam the knee forward, maybe over time it'll keep getting better. At least that's how I viewed it. I just did it for a while and my impingement got worse. For the high arch people, making sure the foot can pronate, so getting length into some of the supinator muscles like the tibialis posterior, for example. You're training ankle eversion and ankle inversion, so just getting the whole foot and ankle to rotate more effectively can automatically just improve the space for dorsiflexion to occur. I always like to look at big toe mobility. Can it flex and can it extend? These are some of the things you want to go after if you're not having too much success with finding a direct stretch in the back of the ankle. Thinking about making an ankle mobility program for the website. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments. What should I call it? Supple ankles? Supple feet? Actually, that sounds a bit creepy. How about supple steps? I like that. If you guys have any questions and you want them answered in a future video, let me know in the comments. That is the end of the workout. Thank you for sticking all the way through and listening to me babble on. It would mean a lot if you liked the video, leave a little comment, and subscribe to the channel if you're just watching me for the first time. And until next time, stay supple.